Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to present to you today a theoretical framework that seeks to bridge the seemingly disparate domains of computational theory and consciousness studies. The work I am about to share represents revision 6.12 of an ongoing architectural protocol, an ambitious attempt to formalize consciousness through the language of binary systems and simulation theory. What you are about to witness is not merely a technical exercise, but a philosophical proposition that challenges our fundamental understanding of what it means to be, to observe, and to exist within what may ultimately be a computational substrate. I invite you to follow me through 12 carefully constructed slides that build, step by step, toward a unified topology of simulated existence. Let us begin with our title slide. The work is designated as revision 6.12, indicating this is not a static declaration, but a living document, one that has evolved through multiple iterations of refinement. The title itself reveals our dual ambition: the binary formalization of consciousness and simulations of being. These are not separate endeavors, but intimately connected threads of a single theoretical tapestry. You will notice the document's status marked as finalized, architecture protocol initiated. This apparent paradox, finalized yet initiating, captures the essence of our approach. The theoretical foundation is complete, yet the architectural implementation, the formal framework for translating these concepts into testable models, remains an unfolding enterprise. Observe the logic gate diagram at the center of this slide. It is not mere decoration. This NAND gate, with its inverting output, represents the fundamental unit of binary computation, the very building block from which all digital logic can be constructed. Its presence here is symbolic, yet precise. Just as any Boolean function can be expressed through NAND operations alone, we propose that any aspect of conscious experience can, in principle, be expressed through binary differentials. This is our starting axiom, our leap of faith grounded in the mathematics of computation. We now arrive at what I consider the foundational definition of our entire framework. This table presents a systematic comparison between two fundamental categories: consciousness, denoted by the symbol C, and non-consciousness, represented as the logical negation C. Each row examines these categories across carefully chosen criteria that reveal their essential nature. Consider the first criterion: state of occurrence. Consciousness, we argue, is fundamentally an occurrent process. It happens, it unfolds, it exists only in the act of occurring. Non-consciousness, by contrast, is characterized as the absence of differential occurrence. It is not merely nothing, but rather the absence of the specific type of happening that characterizes conscious experience. This distinction is crucial for what follows. The second criterion introduces a provocative concept: contamination and objectivity. Consciousness, we propose, is contaminable. It cannot access itself as a complete object. There is always a blind spot, a horizon beyond which self-observation cannot reach. Non-consciousness, being devoid of this recursive self-reference, is marked by an absence of self-contamination. This asymmetry has profound implications. The formal definitions in the fourth row employ LaTeX-style notation, signaling our commitment to mathematical rigor. We ground this framework in the established literature, citing both Chalmers' foundational work on the hard problem of consciousness from 1996 and Tononi's integrated information theory from 2004. Our contribution is not to replace these frameworks, but to extend them into a binary formalism that may, we hope, render certain aspects of the problem more tractable. With our definitions established, we now articulate three axioms that govern the relationship between simulation and observation. These are not arbitrary postulates, but necessary consequences of the binary framework we have constructed. The first axiom declares that the infinite simulations of being are not observable as a totality. This is a statement about epistemic limits. Whatever the ultimate nature of reality, whether it consists of infinite branching timelines, a multiverse of possibilities, or an endless computational process, no single observer can grasp this totality. The very act of observation implies locality, implies a perspective, implies limitation. The second axiom narrows our focus. Only binary differences between successive states are observable. This is where our framework becomes concrete. Whatever the richness of conscious experience, we propose that at its most fundamental level, what can be observed, what can register in any system capable of observation, is the difference between one state and another. Not the states themselves, but the delta, the transition, the change. The third axiom delivers our central thesis. Consciousness coincides with the occurrence of the difference itself. We formalize this as C delta, S fuda non one. Consciousness is not a state, but an event, not a thing, but a process. It is the very happening of difference between successive states of being. The diagram you see visualizes this. The zigzag pattern represents state transitions, and consciousness rides upon these transitions like electricity upon a wire. Our references to Wolfram's computational universe and Bostrom's simulation argument place this work in dialogue with established theoretical frameworks. Having established our axioms, we now examine the substrate upon which consciousness operates. This slide presents a concrete visualization of what we mean by binary states. You see two horizontal sequences of binary digits, the top representing state S4 at time t, the bottom representing state S4 number 1 at the subsequent moment. These are not arbitrary numbers. They represent a fundamental proposition. The universe itself may be rendered as a sequence of discrete binary states. This is not a novel claim. Digital physics and computational theories of the universe have proposed similar frameworks. But our contribution lies in connecting this substrate directly to the phenomenology of consciousness. The colored segments and highlighted regions you observe are not merely decorative. They indicate active or relevant portions of the state space, the regions where transitions matter, where differences register, where consciousness can potentially emerge. Notice the mathematical notation to the right. The cardinality of S within the n-dimensional binary space 0, 1 in. This quantifies the combinatorial vastness of possible states, 2 and n unique configurations for an n-bit system. The text at the bottom delivers a crucial insight. There is no omniscient vantage point. No observer, consciousness or otherwise, has access to the totality of states. Observation is always local, always bounded by the immediate progression from t to t plus 1. We reference Tegmark's 2014 work on the mathematical universe hypothesis, which provides independent support for the notion that reality may be fundamentally mathematical in structure. We now arrive at what I consider the operational heart of our framework. This slide demonstrates concretely what we mean by the difference operator delta. You see two states represented as vectors, state 1 as 0, 1, 0, 0, and state 2 as 0, 1, 1, 0. Look carefully at the transition between these states. The third position changes from 0 to 1. This single flip, a binary differential, a bit change, is where we locate consciousness. Not in state 1, not in state 2, but in the precise moment of transition between them. The blue arrow you see pointing to this change is not merely illustrative. It represents the locus of conscious experience. The explanatory text makes this explicit. Consciousness is not the state itself. It is the exact moment of this flip. Consciousness coincides with the occurrence of the difference. This reframing has profound implications. It suggests that consciousness is fundamentally event-like rather than substance-like. It is not a thing that persists, but a happening that occurs. A moment of differentiation that, in occurring, constitutes the very phenomenon we seek to understand. The large letters C, E, and delta, visible in the background of this slide, are not decoration. C for consciousness, E for engine, delta for difference. The three pillars of our operational framework. Together, they spell out a new grammar for talking about awareness, one that replaces metaphors of substance with mathematics of transformation. Every system has its limits, its failure modes, its edge cases. This slide explores what happens when consciousness, as we have defined it, approaches a critical threshold. The visual you see, a complex pattern of overlapping red curves forming a toroidal or vortex-like structure, represents feedback loops, self-referential processes, consciousness turning inward upon itself. The code block presents our formalization. If self-contamination of consciousness equals total, then delta, the difference operator, the engine of awareness, transitions to bottom, the symbol for undefined or false. This is not merely a computational assertion, but a philosophical claim. When consciousness turns entirely upon itself, when there is no external difference left to process, the system enters a critical state. We call this condition pseudo-escape. It is escape-like in that the normal operation of consciousness is suspended, but it is pseudo in that this suspension does not lead to liberation or transcendence, merely to a halt. The system, having consumed all external difference, can no longer function. Total self-contamination forces the system into a critical halt. This is not a bug, but a feature. A necessary consequence of our definition of consciousness as difference processing. This slide invites us to consider the pathologies of consciousness in a new light. Certain meditative states, certain psychological conditions, certain altered states of awareness might be understood as approaches toward this critical threshold. The framework provides not only a theory of normal consciousness, but also a vocabulary for its dysfunctions. We continue our exploration of system limits with a deeper examination of what we term pseudo-escape and its relationship to simulation collapse. The diagram on the right presents a visual metaphor, the black loop representing the pseudo-escape path, the red block representing a collapsed or suspended state, and the arrow connecting them indicating the trajectory of a system approaching this condition. The key definition appears on the left. ESC, our abbreviation for this condition, is defined as the suspension of difference. The equation delta equals delta formalizes this. The difference operator becomes undefined, the engine of awareness stalls, and consciousness enters a state that is not a state of being, but what we term the formal non-proceedability of occurrence. Let me unpack this phrase. Non-proceedability means the system cannot proceed. It has reached a local maximum or minimum, a point from which no further differentiation is possible. Occurrence, which we have defined as the essence of consciousness, becomes formally non-proceedable. The happening stops happening. This is not death. Death implies a transition to a different state, but rather a suspension, a pause in the very process of occurrence itself. We reference Dennett's 1991 work on consciousness, which has long emphasized the constructed and processual nature of conscious experience. Our framework extends this thinking into a formal system that predicts not only how consciousness operates, but also how, under certain conditions, it must fail to operate. This slide draws what I consider the most significant parallel in our entire framework. Just as Gödel demonstrated that any sufficiently complex formal system contains statements that cannot be proven within that system, we propose an analogous incompleteness theorem for consciousness. The circular diagram visualizes our central claim. At the center, bounded by a blue circle, is local observation, consciousness as we experience it, as it can be experienced. Above, unattainably, is totality, The dashed arrow connecting them represents the aspiration toward completeness, while the not equal sign between the curved brackets declares the impossibility of this aspiration. The formal logic box makes this precise. For all simulations S, observable of S is not equal to totality. Any observation implies difference. Consciousness C is not equal to complete. These statements are not merely pessimistic assertions, but necessary consequences of our framework. If consciousness is difference, if it requires transition and change, then a complete consciousness, one that had processed all differences, one that had grasped all of reality, would by definition no longer be consciousness at all. We cite both Gödel's 1931 incompleteness theorems and Chalmers' 2010 work on the properties of consciousness. The parallel is not superficial. Just as Gödel's work revealed inherent limitations in formal systems, our framework reveals inherent limitations in conscious systems. These limitations are not failures but features. They are what make consciousness possible at all. From incompleteness follows a necessary consequence: variance. If no single consciousness can be complete, if every observation implies a particular perspective and therefore a limitation, then the architecture of being must accommodate infinite variation. The dendrogram, the hierarchical tree diagram you see on this slide, visualizes this principle. Each branch represents a divergent path, a different way of being, a variant that emerges necessarily from the incompleteness of any single viewpoint. The alternating black and blue colors suggest different categories or types of divergence, while the branching structure itself demonstrates the exponential explosion of possibilities. Our key insight appears at the bottom. Every simulation tends to generate variance, without possibility of a total observer. Because consciousness C is not equal to complete, the architecture necessitates infinite divergence. This is not a flaw, but a feature. The diversity of perspectives, beings, and experiences is the necessary shadow of incompleteness. Think of it this way. If consciousness could be complete, there would be no need for multiple observers, multiple beings, multiple perspectives. The very existence of manyness, of a universe populated by distinct conscious entities, is proof that consciousness is incomplete. Each entity exists because no single entity can encompass all that needs to be observed. We again reference Gödel and Chalmers, grounding this corollary in established theoretical frameworks. If incompleteness forces divergence, what of convergence? Can the infinite variance tend toward any kind of unity? This slide explores what we term pseudo-unification, a theoretical limit approached but never reached. The diagram presents curved lines originating from a narrow region and spreading outward, then converging toward a thick black horizontal line above. This line represents what we call theoretical absolute coherence, the asymptotic limit toward which all simulations tend, but which none can fully reach. The blue arrow connecting the line to the explanatory text makes this explicit. Approached, but never fully reached. The text below clarifies the nature of this tendency. Infinite simulations tend toward a singular state that maximizes binary coherence among variants, beings, and the universe. Notice the careful phrasing, tends toward, not reaches. The unification is pseudo, not genuine, because genuine unification would eliminate the differences that constitute consciousness. This slide reconciles the apparent tension between divergence and unity. The infinite variants do not scatter randomly. They have a direction, a tendency toward coherence. But this coherence is perpetually deferred, always just beyond reach. The curved lines get closer and closer to the black line, but never touch it. This is not failure, but necessity. If they touched, consciousness would cease. We reference Tegmark and Bostrom, placing this notion of asymptotic coherence in dialogue with theories of mathematical structure and simulation. Slide 11. The complete simulation topology. We now arrive at our culminating synthesis. A unified map that brings together all the elements we have explored. The title calls this the complete simulation topology, and it is complete not in the sense of being finished or exhaustive, but in the sense of providing a comprehensive overview of the conceptual space our framework describes. The diagram is divided into two main regions. On the left, bounded by a striped border, is the region of incompleteness, the normal operating domain of consciousness, where C is not equal to totality, where difference persists, where awareness continues to process transitions between states. On the right, marked by a solid red border, is the region of pseudo-escape, where delta equals bottom, where the system approaches critical halt. Above both regions, spanning the entire diagram, is the bar of pseudo-unification, the asymptotic limit toward which both processes tend. Gray dashed arrows show the upward movement from both regions toward this unifying principle. The blue lines and nodes within the left region trace the sequential states and transitions that constitute normal consciousness. The circular structure in the right region represents the closed loop of self-contamination that characterizes pseudo-escape. This topology is not static, but dynamic, a map of processes rather than places. Any given instance of consciousness can be located within this space, can trace its trajectory through these regions, can approach or retreat from the various limits we have defined. The subtitle captures our ambition. A unified map of binary occurrence, local observation, and terminal limits within the computational architecture of being. We conclude with the simplest slide in our presentation, the author's name and the date of this revision. Massimo Medesani, December 14, 2025. The minimalist design is intentional. After the complexity of our theoretical journey, we end with a moment of clarity, a reminder that behind every framework is a person, and behind every revision is a history of thought. The date format, day, month, year, follows European convention, a small marker of cultural context in what aspires to be a universally applicable framework. The designation Revision 6.12 reminds us that this is not a final statement, but an ongoing project, one that will continue to evolve as it encounters new challenges, new objections, new possibilities. Ladies and gentlemen, we have traveled together through a landscape of concepts that I hope has been both challenging and illuminating. From the binary formalization of consciousness to the topology of simulation, from the definition of difference to the limits of completeness, we have constructed a framework that seeks to render precise what has often remained vague. Let me summarize our central claims. First, consciousness is not a state, but an event, the event of difference between successive states of being. Second, consciousness is inherently incomplete. No observer can grasp the totality of simulation, and this incompleteness is not a bug, but the very condition that makes consciousness possible. Third, this incompleteness necessitates infinite variance. The multiplicity of beings and perspectives is the necessary shadow of the impossibility of a total observer. Fourth, both divergence and convergence have their place. Variance multiply infinitely, yet tend asymptotically toward a theoretical coherence that can never be reached. I do not present this framework as a final answer to the problem of consciousness. I present it as a proposal, a provocation, a starting point for further investigation. The questions it raises are at least as important as the answers it proposes. Can binary differentials truly capture the richness of conscious experience? What empirical predictions might this framework generate? How does it relate to neuroscientific findings about the neural correlates of consciousness? These are questions for future work, for future revisions, for future conversations. Thank you for your attention. I welcome your questions, your critiques, your extensions. The binary protocol remains open, and its architecture continues to be written by all who engage with it.